We want everyone the president wants everyone in his administration on the same page of the playbook. Right-left axis, theater. It's meant to divide and conquer. Don't go there. From a public policy standpoint, you work on the up and down axis, we were told. Up being freedom and down being oppression. We were told, didn't mention the name deep state, didn't mention the word globalist, but we were told that there were people in the government that had been there for years. There were people outside of the government who had tentacles into the government who were focused on that up and down axis to oppress as many Americans and people of the world as possible. And their goal was to do it through public policy. And our goal was to take those people on head on and bring information and policies to the president that were focused on freedom and that would, if you will, undermine those in government and outside of government with ties into government that were focused on oppression. I've asked my IT guru, Nick, to play for you a clip of Ronald Reagan from 24 years before that meeting in the White House occurred. It was in 1964. Ronald Reagan was supporting Barry Goldwater in the 64 presidential election. And he gave a speech about this very issue. We're going to put that clip in here because it's imperative you hear it from the man himself. In 1964, he was telling you what they were up to and what is happening today. True. 56 years ago, he put it on the table. It's interesting, in 2016, when President Trump was running, he also put it on the table about what they were up to. Nick is going to play that clip for you right now.
This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. Now, it doesn't require expropriation or confiscation of private property or business to impose socialism on a people. What does it mean whether you hold the deed to or the title to your business or property if the government holds the power of life and death over that business or property? And such machinery already exists. The government can find some charge to bring against any concern it chooses to prosecute. Every businessman has his own tale of harassment. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government. And freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. Not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had some place to escape to." And in that sentence, he told us the entire story. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves. You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down. Man's old age dream, the ultimate in individual freedom consistent with law and order, or down to the ant-heap of totalitarianism. And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. In this vote harvesting time, they use terms like the Great Society, or, as we were told a few days ago by the President, we must accept a greater government activity in the affairs of the people. But they've been a little more explicit in the past, and among themselves, and all of the things I now will quote have appeared in print. These are not Republican accusations. For example, they have voices that say the Cold War will end through our acceptance of a not undemocratic socialism. Another voice says the profit motive has become outmoded. It must be replaced by the incentives of the welfare state. Or our traditional system of individual freedom is incapable of solving the complex problems of the 20th century. Senator Fulbright has said at Stanford University that the Constitution is outmoded. He referred to the President as our moral teacher and our leader, and he says he is hobbled in his task by the restrictions of power imposed on him by this antiquated document. He must be freed so that he can do for us what he knows is best. And Senator Clark of Pennsylvania, another articulate spokesman, defines liberalism as meeting the material needs of the masses through the full power of centralized government. Well, I, for one, resent it when a representative of the people refers to you and me, the free men and women of this country, as the masses. This is a term we haven't applied to ourselves in America. But beyond that, the full power of centralized government, this was the very thing the Founding Fathers sought to minimize. They knew that governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people. And they know when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. They also knew, those Founding Fathers, that outside of its legitimate functions, government does nothing as well or as economically as the private sector of the economy.
Ronald Reagan laid it all on the line. He told us what they were up to and what their ultimate goals would be. As I mentioned prior to the clip playing, it was laid out to me in 1988. And those of us that have come forward to speak about the deep state, the globalist syndicate, have been targeted. I mean, Obama. I mean, look, let's face it. Bush 1, Bush 2, Clinton, Obama. All puppets of the deep state. And when Obama tried Obamacare, there were several of us that sniffed that out right away. Look, if they can take control of your health care, they can take control of every aspect of a family's life, of an individual's life, and of a business's lives. That's what Obamacare was all about. It was based on the most unethical and inhumane means of cutting health care costs, the rationing and denying of care. And when I went after him in 2009, just like a good globalist puppet, he unleashed the IRS on me and my family. I've stated that before. It's what totalitarian thugs do. They utilize their power and the agencies around them to target people. Biden, the basement dweller, as you well know, was a vice president for Barack Obama. We know that he was integral in the targeting of General Flynn. We know that based on transcripts of conversations. So where is Joe Biden on the scale when it comes to his support of Marxists and communists? Well, recently, this was in Breitbart, Joe Biden quotes Mao Zedong. Senior advisor called Mao favorite political philosopher. This is from Joel Pollack. Former Vice President Joe Biden used a quote made famous by the late Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong in an online fundraiser with Valerie Jarrett, former President Barack Obama's chief White House advisor, on July 13, 2020. As the Washington Examiner notes, Joe Biden cited a quote made famous by Chinese Communist dictator Mao Zedong during a digital fundraiser speech with former Obama senior advisor Valerie Jarrett. Quote, "We've got to get real economic relief into women's hands," Biden said. There were 14 wealthy donors who attended the digital fundraising session. That's more people than he usually pulls at his own rallies, right? 14? According to the Pool reporter who watched the event, Biden then cited the Chinese proverb, "Women hold up half the sky." The phrase comes from a proclamation by Mao in the mid-20th century that helped grant certain rights to women in China. The phrase became commonplace in China at the time, often appearing on pieces of propaganda in factories or other industrial areas. A couple weeks prior to that, Mary Fanning and Alan Jones, investigative journalists, outed a high-level senior advisor to Joe Biden, someone by the name of Anita Dunn. And the fact that she had come out in a number of years ago, when Obama was president, when she was working for Obama, stating that Mao was one of her two favorite political philosophers. And Anita Dunn is now a senior advisor to Joe Biden. You want to know what the Biden administration would look like? Well, just look at the who's who and the Marxists in our country, the communists, the socialists. On our Insider Insights series, I recently had Senator Pat Colbeck as a guest. And he spoke about what the communists and the Marxists are all about. This was outlined actually by a defector, if you will, from the KGB some years ago. So they had four stages that they were implementing in the United States to get control. Demoralization. Yeah. I mean, just look at what's happening with our education system. Look at what's happened with our justice system. And it is demoralizing. Destabilization. So then it's no shock that it's been found that Black Lives Matter and Antifa, Sunrise Group, a number of these Marxist socialist organizations are funded through Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. Destabilization. Then there's the third part, crisis mode. Oh, you think there's a little crisis going on in Minneapolis and Seattle and Portland and Chicago and all around the country? Yeah. And then the fourth is called normalization or subjugation. That's when everybody just gives up. And that's what General Flynn wrote about in his 2% versus the 98%. About not giving up. You see, when the deep state targeted General Flynn, they not only targeted him, they targeted you and every American. They realized if they could take down Flynn, it would fit nicely into their plan of demoralization, destabilization, crisis, which would make subjugation much easier. This is why his family, Sidney Powell, fought so hard for his freedom. Because they were fighting for your freedom as well, and mine, and 320 million other Americans' freedoms. But there are some that have been players in the deep state that are starting to walk away. To use their own term, they're becoming, quote, woke, end quote. Barry Weiss quits New York Times. Same New York Times that David Rockefeller was talking about, right? The same New York Times who printed that article that David Rockefeller wrote in 1973 about how great China was. Yeah. Barry Weiss quits the New York Times, excoriates paper as performance space for woke Olympics. The internal schism at New York Times has claimed yet another staffer. Opinion editor Barry Weiss has left the paper and penned a scorching resignation letter denouncing the Times as nothing more than an echo chamber for woke activists masquerading as journalists who believe dissent has no place on the platform. Quote, Barry Weiss, here's what she said. But the lessons that ought to have followed the election, lessons about the importance of understanding other Americans, the necessity of resisting tribalism, and the centrality of the free exchange of ideas to a democratic society, have not been learned. Instead, a new consensus has emerged in the press, but perhaps especially at this paper, that truth isn't a process of collective discovery, but an orthodoxy already known to an enlightened few whose jobs is to inform everyone else, end quote. You see, she got to a point where she couldn't even take it. Because let's face it, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the bought-off lamestream fake media, look, they're all playing into this KGB handbook, the Marxist handbook. They tried the Russian hoax to get rid of President Trump and to destroy our country. That didn't work. They tried the Ukraine hoax. That didn't work. They tried the impeachment hoax. That didn't work. Then they tried their freedom-stripping virus that they unleashed on their own people in China. Does that surprise anybody? Mao killed 40 to 80 million of his own. No, it shouldn't surprise anybody. Interesting that the freedom-stripping virus reared its head right when the freedom movement was moving from Hong Kong into mainland China. Boom, that stopped. And then they willfully walked it into Western Europe and the United States. A true act of terrorism. But they thought the virus was going to cause such social upheaval and economic upheaval that Trump would be pushed out. The Constitution would be shredded. Their little gang of Marxists and socialists would be able to stroll right in. That didn't happen. So then, enter Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Enter chaos, destruction, death. Minneapolis, Seattle, Portland, Chicago, Atlanta, you name it. New York. But they haven't won. Why? Because some of the 2% are starting to get woke and saying, you know what, I don't want to be part of this anymore. This is off the charts. So part of the 2%, they're starting to walk away. And even more importantly, a big chunk of the 98% are starting to mobilize. And they're saying, you know what? Enough. Enough. They've taken the hint from General Flynn. They heard their marching orders. And they're peacefully protesting. They're not burning anything down. They're not torching anybody's business. They're not killing anybody. No. What are they doing? They're talking. Remember, they want to put a mask on you. They want to put you in house arrest. Stay home. Stay safe. So you don't talk to your family, to your friends, to your coworkers, to your neighbors about what's really going on. And this is what General Flynn was talking about. Word of mouth is a huge weapon that the deep state fears. Educating people with the facts. So their latest thing is tearing down statues. It's kind of reminiscent of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. By the way, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, as we pointed out on this platform, all tentacles of the deep state, just as BLM and Antifa are. Same MO, pulling down the statues, pull down history. Let's give you a little history. You know, the New York Times is quite the tentacle of the deep state. And they're pulling down all these statues of Confederates. And look, I've never met anybody who has said that slavery is something that our country should have embraced or should still embrace. Come on. It's the ultimate oppression of people. But to pull down statues, by the way, most of these statues they're pulling down are people that have associated themselves with the Democrat Party. I mean, the 4 statues that they removed out of the Capitol, Nancy Pelosi, we're going to remove all the Confederate, well, they were all Democrats. The party of slavery. The problem is that the Republicans in Congress are mute. Maybe they're paid to be mute. Ever think of that? As I said, there's one political party in Washington. That's what I realized. One political party. They're called the Republicans. All owned and operated by the deep state. But the New York Times, Rockefeller, New York Times is great. New York Times, wasn't for the New York Times covering up for us, this wouldn't have gotten to the point where we've been able to exert such pressure and control. We're going this whole thing through, slavery, okay. But let's not tear stuff down so we forget about what happened. What's the saying my mom used to preach to me? If you forget history, you're doomed to repeat the past. Michael Goodwin did a little digging on the New York Times and its ownership. The family that owns the New York Times were slaveholders. Did you hear Rachel Maddow talking about that? Or Anderson Cooper? Or no. This is Michael Goodwin. It's far worse than I thought. In addition to the many links between the family that owns the New York Times and the Civil War Confederacy, new evidence shows that members of the extended family from the New York Times were slaveholders. Are they burning that down? No. No, they won't. They never will. And the reason is because the 2%, what's left of the 2%, are all based on not only oppression, but hypocrisy. And you see, that hypocrisy that angers you and angers me so much is actually what's making the 98% start to wake up from their slumber. The only way we defeat the deep state is by speaking to those around us and speaking the truth and facts. And that's why we have this platform. To provide you information, data, that you can then network to your friends, your families, your neighbors, and your coworkers. You might get some blowback. Point them to our channel. Let me be the bad guy. Look at the interview we posted with Dr. Karlin Borshenko last week. That'll wake some people up. Network that to your friends and family. It'll wake them up. Karlin Borshenko walked away from the 2% and became a freedom fighter. And she is one of the deep state's biggest nightmares. I thank you for your time. I thank you for joining me today. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail.